What about, we have some other things that are unique. We have this system of independent university boards. We elect the boards for Michigan State, Wayne State, and U of M. The others are appointed by the governor, but they are autonomous universities. But we have this blend where the big three universities, we vote, for their trustees, and the others are appointed. What's the story behind that?
Well, there's two things to say about that. First of all, under the old Constitution, the big three were elected statewide also. But there was a feeling that they ought to be, or most of them, except for the big three, ought to be appointed. And then secondly, as it worked out, the education lobby pretty much wrote the education section of the new Constitution. We had a lot of important people on the committee, including John Hanna and other.
He was the president
leaders
at Michigan State.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we watched it very carefully. And everybody understood it and thought they had done a very good job, but we were very happy that that issue did not get into a big wrangle at the convention. And the reason it didn't, because the committee members knew a lot about the subject, and they consulted with what I've referred to as the education lobby. It's not that they had lobbyists at that time, but it's just that the group of people who were active in education, particularly in the higher education, got together and with the committee and worked it out in a very satisfactory way at that time.
What about the local government issue? Michigan has this tradition of having townships and local government stemming from territorial days. This was up for review. You said the Township Association opposed the CON-CON. I mentioned how Glenn Allen, I believe he was on that local government committee.
Oh yes, he was.
They, in the end, they decided to retain, townships and local governments in Michigan. How do you remember that debate at all?
I do. And when I was running for the convention, one of the most prominent business people in Michigan, who my father was distantly acquainted with, but who lived in Lansing, wrote me a letter running and said, we've got to do away with townships. They don't make any sense. Well, that astounded me as a young man. And when I got to the convention, and in the process of getting there, it became very clear that the Townships Association was one of the most powerful political organizations in the state. And if we did anything like that in a proposed constitution, it would be a guarantee that the new proposed document would be defeated. So, and everybody else knew that too, pretty
So there's
much.
a political awareness. You want to make
There's an awareness, and nobody brought the issue up in that way. We did a lot about the powers of townships, counties, and cities, but nobody ever suggested in the convention we do away with townships, although for one reason or another, that suggestion has been made in recent times as well.
So it'd be fair to say then, as a delegate, you want your work to be approved in the end, and you're sensitive to, the controversies of the day, and you don't want to put something in there that's gonna undo all your work and have it voted down.
Ideally, that is true, and it did work pretty much that way back then. But of course, back then the parties weren't perfect, and they're never 100% perfect. But we could work in a bipartisan way. In fact, in the Republican side, where I was, we never even had an attempt to have unit rule. We had caucus meetings to discuss issues, but nobody ever said the caucus is going this way and all Republicans have got to vote that way. Nobody ever attempted that, and today I understand it's quite different, at least in Congress and many other places.
Michigan has had 6 constitutional conventions, so twice constitutions have been proposed that have been turned down. Not recently, but I believe 2 have been defeated. One
was a convention in 1867, and one followed that by a few years. It actually wasn't a convention, it was a commission. The convention had presented the Constitution, the voters had voted it down, and it was very interesting historically why that happened, but they did, and the commission was also voted down, or the result of the commission. The commission was held, made recommendations, and it really didn't get anywhere. I think the public regarded it as sort of a citizens advisory committee, which usually doesn't get very much done, and they didn't think that what they did was something they wanted to adopt, so they rejected it.
Now, one of the provisions, of course, in here, and we touched on it earlier, is a provision that every 16 years, the question of a con comes back on the ballot.
Yes.
And this is year 48. It's a 16th year.
That's right.
So it's going to be up this fall. Why did you put that provision in there?
Well, I think it's because we felt, like I feel today, that while the basic fabric of our present Constitution is sound, there are nevertheless some really important changes which a convention could make in it to make it better. And of course, on the other hand, we all know that a convention puts everything on the table, you know, not just something you want, but everything, and including a lot of things that have been adopted in recent years. They're all opened up, and it's done in a, perhaps unfortunately, but it has to be a partisan election. So unless the two parties can exercise some bipartisanship now, it might be a more difficult experience than we had. And of course, then there's also the dollar cost of it. I heard from one of the folks that I knew that said he knew about it, that the Senate Fiscal Agencies estimated that it would cost quite a lot of money to have a new Constitution. But those are things that would naturally be on the table anyway.
Some have suggested if there was a new constitutional convention, it could be done by making use, at least in part, of the internet. You know, that this would be a way to afford maybe some more citizen participation. I mean, you know, even today, you can go to the legislative website and you can look at bills that we're introducing to follow their course. So some have suggested that if there was a new constitution, there might be a way to use some type of web-based system as opposed to, you know, physically meeting constantly. Well,
let me put it this way. I think having a web-based information system about the convention would be excellent, but I'm quite certain that it would not substitute, it could not satisfactorily substitute for the actual meeting of the delegates.
Yeah.
The delegates would all bring varying abilities with respect to computers to the convention, and I think it would be very doubtful that it would be useful to have them meet electronically. I think they should still meet physically, just as they did in the past.
Gil, we have just a few seconds left. Is there anything else the people of Kalamazoo should know about Michigan's Constitution?
It's difficult to say because there are so many things.
So they should read it.
That we all ought to know about it. That's exactly right.
They should read it, and then they should understand what it involves.
That's right. And there are a number of provisions, probably 4 or 5 now, that are obsolete because of federal developments over the years. And of course, one advantage of a constitutional convention is that those could be all cleaned out so that they would not be confusing to voters, or particularly school kids who were hopefully going to be educated about how Michigan government works.
Well, Gil, thanks so much for being on my program. It was delightful to have you here, and thanks for watching my program, Current Events with Tom George.